Hello, I'm Toby Hadoke, and I like Doctor Who and stuff, and I've got a friend of mine to choose a Doctor Who story and to nominate their favourite things about it. I have to then watch the story and see if I can guess what those favourite things are going to be, all the while commentating positively. Enjoy!
Hello Toby, this is Jim Sangster. You know that guy from Liverpool who keeps popping up on the DVD extras? The story I've chosen for you to watch is the very first one, but not the very first episode. Haha, I don't want it to be that easy for you. No, we're going to watch the cavemen episodes. You know, the ones some older fans call the Tribe of Gum. So that's Cave of Skulls, Forest of Fear, The Firemaker. The reason why I'd like you to watch these three rather than the whole thing is everyone rightly praises the first episode. It's a TV masterpiece. But they usually dismiss the next three. And I genuinely love it all. Thanks to the Five Faces repeat series in 1981, that was the first time I saw William Hartnell as the Doctor, and I loved how dark and moody it all was, watching it across a week in November when it was all dark and moody outside.
Well, hello everybody. Welcome to, should we call it the Tribe of Gum, or 100,000 BC, or An Unearthly Child, episodes 2, 3 and 4. Call it whatever you like. I will know what you mean either way, so therefore the words that you have used have conveyed your meaning, which is all that is required. And any further discussion is unnecessary. I noticed, by the way, that Jim Sangster, who, by the way, is one of the most creative people imaginative. He showed me creative people ever. He showed me a brilliant war machine that he'd printed off with a 3D printer. I mean, any of those words going together, even 10 years ago, would have sounded to me like magic. But he creates his own Doctor Who figures at home. He's an absolute genius. But look, yeah, Jim has chosen, I think, rather cleverly, so that we don't get overshadowed by that first episode, which means somebody is still to choose that, which is interesting. I think that's going to be one of the easiest ones to do. Anyway, stop talking, Toby, and note to self, stop saying interesting. Whenever I say interesting, there's a klaxon goes off that goes, I don't think that's particularly interesting. Right, we are going to start by travelling back to the dawn of time with episode. It's actually, we're starting with episode 2. So we go to, so I'm on the DVD, the wonderful Beginnings DVD, a box set. So let's do this. Press play in 3, 2, 1. There we go. Now, is this about almost the least thought of 3 episodes in the whole of Doctor Who? They're never episodes I've given an awful lot of thought to, because they are overshadowed by the first night. I, like Jim Sangster, saw these for the first time as part of the Five Faces of Doctor Who, which was a repeat season between Doctors 4 and 5 in order to bridge the gap. Leslie Bates there has history as Shadow of Cal, whereas actual Cal is Jeremy Young. So those were done at different times, those, even though this is on film as well. And also you wouldn't hire an actor to play. I don't think Jeremy Young was cast when the Shadow shot was done anyway. But you wouldn't get an actor to be a Shadow at the end of episode 1, where you could get an extra who would cost, I think, £5 and 5 shillings and a penny, whereas I think Jeremy Young cost £63. So there we go. That's David Rosen, that young man, who somebody tweeted me, Steve, hi Steve, who I've never met, one of those people you reaches out across the internet, was his neighbour, and said, oh, you should interview this guy. And when I was doing Who's Round and moving around, I liked the idea, but I'd actually got quite a few people from the dawn of Who, including Waris Hussein, the director, and a few of the camera personnel and people like that. And I sort of dropped that thread. And then when I was starting these podcasts, particularly the sister podcasts to this one called Too Much Information, where I've started at the very beginning, I thought it would be great to speak to David, and sadly discovered that he'd passed away about 18 months ago. Many opportunities like that I have not seized, and I feel bad about. But I have to remind myself that I can't do everything and speak to everyone. But seems extra frustrating when someone is so close, and especially I think as when you see somebody as a child and you think, oh well, they're a child, they'll be around forever, which of course time is slightly crueler than that. And indeed, none of the adults of guest cast, apart from Jeremy Young as Cal, is still with us. So we have Derek Newick here, doing a good job as Tsar. It's a hard thing to be asked to do, to rub a bone and shout at some sticks. And I think the cave people actors in this do a really tricky job, and they pull it off very, very well. I've got a slight conflict of interests because Too Much Information, the sister podcast to this, well done, Derek Newick. That's hard, and he really commits to it. Has gone into these episodes in great detail, and part of what I do here, as well as celebrating Doctor Who, I hope is to impart some facts or some observations, and I'm quite. Look at that shot of the TARDIS on the landscape, just something as simple as that, and the fact that it's a the first one, or an early piece. This is all history in the making. But yeah, I'm slightly wary that I've given out a lot of information on this on the other podcasts, which I know are the ones that people really like because they're the most downloaded, but they also are the ones that take the most work. So I hope you're enjoying these as well. The feedback's been very nice, but everybody always says, "Oh, I really like Too Much Information." Well, I bet you do. They take forever. So the TARDIS has landed, and here is this uneasy crew. Hartnell in his hat. And I think originally it was planned that the TARDIS was supposed to break because of this journey. I don't think that's as blatant here, although obviously the rendering the crew unconscious thing is not the usual modus operandi of the space-time machine, which would cause a few problems. So yeah, here's Barry Newbury's. Barry Newbury has taken over as designer from Peter Brahatsky, who literally only does the first episode. In fact, not literally, because he literally only does the pilot. Barry Newbury actually had taken over by the first episode, even though Brahatsky gets the credit. I like the word charlatan. In fact, when I was a student, we had a theatre company called Charlatan. There's a Doctor Who moment, a Doctor Who. That's I think that was added later. Well, and indeed, a lot of the crew dynamic is the work of David Whittaker, not of Anthony Coburn, the writer. I think David Whittaker polished some of the dynamics between everybody because they're working out how these characters interact. It had a very comparatively long genesis, really, but isn't this? Look, the two women in the background, the two men framing them in the foreground. I love the way all of this stuff is shot. This does have such, they're making history and they don't really know it. But again, we focus so much on that first episode. These are still, early steps. And having this crew dynamic is really helpful. Each one plays the role, and Ian's really the hero, isn't he? He's the identification figure. And I remember I've been looking for it, and I need to dig it out. because there's a speech, is it in the making of Doctor Who, about twin suns circling over or something or other, that was always thought to be that speech that Hartnell's just done, but it wasn't. And I remember seeing that and going, oh, that's not the speech. Where did that speech from Hartnell, that famous Hartnell speech, come from? That's, I think, in the making of Doctor Who, and it doesn't come from anywhere. They've made it up for the making of Doctor Who. I can't check my making of Doctor Who because Chris Chapman's got it, because I sent it to him for a documentary, and I haven't had it back yet. I must make a mental note of that. Well, I've now made more than a mental note of it. And I know that set wasn't especially deep, but it's good, and that very white landscape is effective. So yes, I first watched this as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, and I remember being slightly disappointed. It seemed obvious to me, and I think the production team felt so at the time. It seems like going back to cavemen times seems, oh, hang on, this is the first televised footage we have of the regular TARDIS crew. This is the first thing they filmed that was broadcast. They did the pilot before this scene on the landscape, but the pilot wasn't broadcast. They then filmed this, and then they made the first episode that was broadcast. So this is the first stuff that they did, and it benefits from being on film. That's a great shot of the Doctor, establishing for the first time, oh, why hasn't the police box changed? Which is something that now is part of the DNA of the show. The TARDIS's chameleon circuit, cloaking device, call it what you will, is stuck. Is a 1960s police box, and that's the first time it breaks, which, as I say, continues throughout the show. Whereas the Doctor having a fag, it's not a fag, it's a pipe, is something that happens for the first and only time here. There's a great shot of the axe in the foreground, and Jeremy Young is a brilliant casting because he's got that very striking physiognomy, and there's makeup involved there as well that's sort of accentuated the sort of crevices in his slightly Roman nose. He's actually a very handsome man, but he does have a very striking countenance that they've used to that they've very very cleverly highlighted in order to make him look sort of rough-hewn and caveman-y, and the wigs and everything helps as well, and that slightly sort of jutting jaw thing that he does. And he's the first Doctor Who villain. Welcome, Jeremy Young, the first Doctor Who villain. Oh, yes, and so here's Susan now, re-emphasising the fact that the TARDIS is stuck, which Marjorie Norris in The Guardian rather sniffily said, well, I don't know why it's still a police box. I hope that will be explained in later episodes. She's sort of going, well, Marjorie, it's actually explained twice in this episode. So yes, the Guardian getting the wrong end of the stick and being a bit superior. That's never happened before. And I say that as somebody who writes for The Guardian, but I also find it infuriating at times. Yeah. Anyway, let's not get into that. It's sometimes all right to want popular culture to be in, and entertainment to be intelligent and smart, but you can do that without being sniffy about popular entertainment, a lot of which is actually more intelligent and smart than it's given credit for. That, anyway, I don't know why I'm looking at The Guardian now, but especially as it's The Guardian from 60 years ago. But nonetheless, snootiness does nobody any good. There's nothing wrong with things being liked by a lot of people. That's sort of how democracy works. And yes, sometimes democracy gets it wrong, which is why Shut Up Your Face by Joe Dolce got to #1 and Vienna by Ultravox didn't. There have been worse failings of democracy, but that's the one that springs to mind. I love this TARDIS crew. I think it's such a brilliant dynamic, and I think they're all such good actors. I do think poor old Susan and Barbara get to scream at slightly too much, and have to be hysterical. She has to sort of throw herself at the landscape there, and I think they sort of iron that out a bit. I think it's at its acme here. That's not to say they don't do it, and of course we are talking about something from a long time ago, and the sand is cold because winter is coming, which means that fire is very, very important. I have tracked down another of these kids, but I've not heard back yet. And there's Eileen Way as the old mother. And, they're having something to eat there. Derek Newark as Tsar. And Howard Lang, later famous for the Anedin line, as Hogg. And the inky, but that's I've said this before, but I look at the way these three characters are framed, but I think the lighting in these cave scenes is fantastic, because people in furs grunting each other is not is not the most promising of dramas, but the I think the way that they've made up everybody's teeth, everybody's grown their hair a bit. But the lighting, the inky blackness of the dark, and then the light that shines on the sort of sweaty noses and on the contours of the faces is really, really effective. And I think if more Doctor Who of the 60s had been lit like this, it would be as I imagined it to be. So some of the stories that were slightly disappointing on first viewing was because I'd imagined them to have, sort of inky blackness, and actually they were quite, the contrast was quite bland. I think the lighting, and I've got an eye on what I'm going to choose as my favourite things. But these, and I actually think, I know that Anthony Coburn, the writer, wasn't sure whether he wanted the cave people to speak when he was originally planning it. I think it would have been an absolute nightmare to write, and boring to write as well, without being able to use dialogue. And I actually think the dialogue that they give the cave people, the language patterns that they give them, they're not grunts, but they're also not 20th century speak, and it's a sort of curious halfway house that has an attempt to give a sort of slightly simpler mindset, which doesn't necessarily make sense when you analyse it. I know a bit later on, they think that friend is Ian's name because he says, I'm a friend, but they know what other words mean, but they don't know what the word friend means. But I think that also that sets up that they don't know what some concepts are. I think they've, with something that could be really unpromising and really hokey, I actually think they do the cave people extremely well. Even though the story is, the story is a relatively simplistic power struggle, I think it's better. It is definitely a better story than it is often given credit for. Partially because of this weird sort of alien displacement that we have. Everything is sort of the environment is inhospitable. I think early in Doctor Who's history, it wasn't just the people and the monsters that they encountered that were dangerous. If you think about Marco Polo, where there's sandstorms and there's the desert and they haven't got any water, that the very environment itself, we are pitched from the 20th century into strange times where we don't have our own things at our own disposal, and then Terry Nation's planets, right, or the planets in the different environments in Marinus, the snow and the jungle, the very world itself, nature, climate, all of those things are as inhospitable as people, monsters, politics, and I don't think the show is ever quite like that, as consistently. Again, I'm sure you can now think of examples, maybe, but I do get the feeling that the idea that the TARDIS would pitch us into things where everything was a threat, and the only sanctuary was the ship, and that's very much what this story is. And in fact, one of the cliffhangers is about, we've nearly got home. Oh no, we're gonna have to go back to the cave and all of that. And that's so wonderfully disorienting, I think, and must especially have been for 60s viewers for whom a lot of television was, set in boardrooms and drawing rooms and people's houses, and or anything historical. Everybody was from that place. The clash of ancient and modern, I think, is disorienting and a wonderful, fabulous juxtaposition. I mean, that shot of the TARDIS on the landscape is as perfect an encapsulation as Doctor Who as you like. A 20th century, an ordinary 20th century site, hoiked up and plonked somewhere totally where it is totally incongruous. And that's Doctor Who. That's Doctor Who in a nutshell. And the fact that it's a police box is an idea of absolute genius. I know we don't have them now, but just aesthetically and what it sort of represents is such a. It's a witty idea. It's a cost-saving idea. The very core of Doctor Who is a piece of genius. The idea that the Doctor's spaceship is. And also that it doesn't work properly, which is why Doctor Who has always appealed to me a bit more than things where the heroes are in the best spaceship in the fleet and they're the best damn crew in the universe. No, these are people surviving on their wits. They're a couple of school teachers and a lunatic and a frightened but slightly strange, eccentric youngster in something that can travel through time and space, but not particularly efficiently. I love that. I still feel we can't quite get a grip on these episodes, because not in the way that people could at the time, because we know what is to come. Imagine being there, and I know a few people who were, where this is the beginning of a journey. Oh, to have been on it. I mean, I feel my age now, I'd be a lot older. And Hartnell is great, isn't he? He's such a good piece of casting, and he looks magnificent. And of course the idea that the Doctor has something that we take for granted. I had matches. I can make fire with matches. We can make fire like that. And to these people, it is life and death. It is also power. But of course, then you've got the old mother in the corner. She's the troll. Everyone's going, oh, we love fire. Fire would be brilliant. She's the one that goes, well, I don't like it. There's always somebody like that, isn't there? On any social media. This is a brilliant thing. Yeah, well, it was better in the old days. Or just I don't like it. And that's interesting, because that wasn't always going to be the way that it was the Doctor that saved Ian. But, that kind of says, the Doctors, that even though Ian is the traditional hero. I love this bit where Cal doesn't quite know how to articulate what it is that Barbara does to him. It's quite sort of adult and sophisticated and slightly dodgy. He clearly sort of covets her, but it's not done creepily or sensationally. It's a bit more disturbing than that. It's quite a sophisticated choice. Jeremy Young is excellent. They're all. I mean, I think they're all great. And there's a real, Derek Newick looks like he's chewing on a piece of gristle. Jeremy Young keeps gradually trying to comprehend everything, and actually he's quite sad. I actually feel a bit of sympathy for Cal, because he's the outsider and he's just trying to prove himself, and there is something rather forlorn about him. And then you've got this dynamic where you can only have the chick if you make the fire czar. I remember there's a comedian called Tom Stade who's very cool. He's a witty Canadian. He came to my house years ago and said, "Oh, you got all the Doctor Who. Show me the first episode." So we watched the first episode, and I thought that would be enough for him. And I certainly thought he doesn't want to watch the caveman, rubbish or whatever. And he said, no, show me the next one. So we watched this episode, and I went, "You've probably had enough now, Tony." He went, "No, man, I want to see if Tsar makes the fire." And we watched the whole of the Caveman four-parter, which is not a story I would ever choose to show anybody. And he accepted it totally uncynically. It was. I liked the approval because Tom is a cool guy and a brilliant comedian, and he's at my house having a smoke and watching the first four episodes of Doctor Who, and absolutely taking them on their own terms. Yeah, all right. Yeah, she's there on iTunes giving Fire 1 star. Everyone else is going, "This is brilliant. It keeps us warm. We really like it. It cooks food." She's going, "1 star. Will kill us all in the end." She's the original keyboard warrior. Eileen Way, yes way. Love the way that Waris Hussein shoots, through things and over things. And isn't there something about skulls and bones that are just creepy and off-putting and unsettling? And I find that sort of ties in with what we're doing here. We're watching. We're trying to touch the past, and a lot of these people are dead, and all of this stuff is. Dust in the wind, and I find that whole experience of that this stuff is there forever and captured on film and on tape forever, and we've met, some of us have met some of these people, although William Hartnell was dead when I'd been alive for only a year, so it never would have happened. But there's something about a skull which was once a person, which was once. Somebody looking as an articulate and feeling things just as I am now, in the same way that everything we're watching was once solid and colour and the people were present, and now they're sort of dusty, black and white, evocative recordings, little snapshots of history. And I find that one quite moving, but also quite upsetting, and also quite creepy and strange, and I think all of that is encapsulated, is part of the enjoyment of Doctor Who, and none more so than these 3 episodes because they're the first, they're the initial footsteps into the long history that we now have. Oh, I like that a lot. I think for this episode it is good, isn't it? And it's so simple. I mean, the story is not up to much, and I think Verity Lambert and David Whittaker's disquiet, the producer and script editor's disquiet, that the caveman story was perhaps not the best way to kick off this series that they had high hopes for, because they did. I mean, it only ran for it was only to run for 13 episodes. Well, actually, when they were announced Doctor Who, they say this is going to run all year. They did have, but I think we sometimes like to say, "Oh, it was just this humble little thing that stumbled into existence and became a legend." No, they had high hopes for it. Sidney Newman, who largely conceived it, although they had focus groups and things like that. Was telling stuff, this is going to be great and it's going to last a whole year. Now, there were people within the BBC who had other ideas, and my God, some of the design department people hated it. But yes, to kick off this series, the idea of a sort of squabble in a cave is perhaps not the most, but it is what we see as the beginning of history. It's the beginning of human history. So I suppose it is appropriate, but it's telling that they've never gone, they've never gone that far back. They did. David Whittaker did try to have a caveman in Evil of the Daleks called Og, and that didn't happen. So he didn't learn. But actually, that's going to be my choice. I think the cavemen are better than we deserve. I think it's quite a hokey idea. and as I say, I think they're in a story that's not the most fascinating or interesting or sophisticated, and yet the actors, and I think particularly Jeremy Young, Derek Newark, and as we will see later, she hasn't had a lot to do this episode, Alethea Charlton, who I think is quite extraordinary in some of the later bits. I think are absolutely committed, but also make very, very intelligent choices. And it's not fun stuff to act, actually. Ripe dialogue is good to act. Thoughtful, philosophical stuff is good to act. Witty, light stuff. Sort of grunting simplicity is not ever going to win you any awards. That kind of lack of sophistication of character is not showy, and does not is not usually what people will sort of highlight as being, great examples of the acting art. But I think these examples are, because they actually shouldn't be, and because of. And I think that the way that the dialogue has been rendered and the thought processes have been put in helps. But I know that the actors also worked on the dialogue to slightly coarsen it up and to add grunts and but also that bit with no dialogue that Jeremy Young did when he sort of approaches Barbara is really unsettling and extraordinary. So the way that the cave people do their thing, but particularly that sort of triumvirate is going to be my thing for episode 2. What's Jim Sangster's? Jim, by the way, is a very, very nice fellow. And I used to watch him on the telly or on DVD extras. Think, oh wow! Imagine, being in a position where you're asked to do that sort of thing. So I was very envious of Jim. So it was lovely to meet him and find out he was such a nice chap, and he's very clued up. Okay, Jim, what you got?
My best thing that I love in the Cave of Skulls is the guest cast. And I know you'll mention this, Toby, because, well, it's you. So there's obviously Jeremy Young, who's the show's first villain, and he's self-serving, deceitful, murderous. He's a monster. He's fantastic. You've got Derek Newark, who's surprisingly sympathetic. We feel sad that he doesn't have the mental capacity to understand the time traveler's needs for freedom, because he has to think of the needs of the whole tribe, and these are his ticket to becoming the Firemaker. But the best of the lot is Eileen Way. She gives a beautifully grotesque performance as Old Mother. You know that bit when Old Mother tells Zar that fire will kill us all in the end? And it reminds me of the fact that the next story takes us to a planet where the forests are ashen and most of the population has died out in a neutron war. They literally died in fire. So whether by accident or design, there's some lovely foreshadowing there.
Isn't that true? I think I'm allowed that because I did mention them all, even though I highlighted I think the three. I think I'm going to allow myself, because I said the way the cave people are portrayed. I think we have enough crossover that Jim and I, and this is only going to be 3 episodes. So it'd be nice if come on, give me this. So I think we go into episode 3 with it being 1 point to me. And I do think that is, I love that observation that, the Old Mother, the original troll, fire will kill us all in the end. And as he says in the next story, that's exactly what's happened to the denizens of Skaro. And that's, of course, lest we forget, what is hanging over 1960s, well, not just Britain, but the world. The Bay of Pigs wasn't too far away when, people genuinely thought, I've talked to my mum about this, genuinely thought that the world could be subjected to a nuclear war that would wipe out lots of people. That was a genuine worry. So much so that a lot of people went on anti-nuclear marches. And amongst those on the anti-nuclear marches were members of the theatrical profession, because actors can be a bit demonstrative about their political views. And amongst those on the Aldermaston marches against nuclear war was Eileen Way, who is a committed peace activist and left-winger. And I like to think that on the Aldermaston marches, she held a placard high saying, "Fire will kill us all in the end." It hasn't killed us yet. But Jim Sangster has helped to light the fire within me that loves these episodes, and indeed all episodes of Doctor Who. Thank you for joining me watching these ones, and I will see you for a bit of alliteration in the Forest of Fear next time. But till then, ta-ta. Well, welcome everybody. That was Jim Sangster introducing the idea that we are watching the first Doctor Who story, but without the sort of weight at the top end of the first episode. We're watching the caveman bits, episodes 2, 3, and 4 of which this is episode 3, The Forest of Fear. Those of you watching the YouTube version, if you're listening to the podcast, there is a visual version of this which comes out a little bit later, where you can see what a mess my hair is in and how long my moustache is or isn't. I felt I'd done some lovely stuff to one of the cameras, just hitting it at the right time and making a couple of salient points and looking at the camera. Unfortunately, the camera wasn't looking at me, well, it was, but just my knee. So it's not fire that will kill us all in the end on this podcast. It is incompetence, namely mine. Apologies. I mean, I suspect not being able to see my face is not the worst thing that's going to happen to anybody, but nonetheless, I'd like to do this as well as possible, but I seem hampered by my own incompetence. Anyway, with that out of the way, let us proceed with the third ever episode of Doctor Who. Jim Sangster's going to tell us his favourite thing at the end. He's chosen the guest cast already for episode 2, so that is out. And I was there as well. I sort of talked about the cave people performances. So at the moment, it's 1-0 to me. Because for the uninitiated, my guest chooses their favourite things about the story, I have to see if I can choose the same things, and if I choose more of this, if the majority of my choices are the same as their choices, I win, which currently, at the time of recording, has never happened, and who knows, perhaps never will. But let's see if I do get a victory, if it's going to take place in the Forest of Fear. And so I would ask you to press play. I'm watching on the BBC DVD box set. So I will be pressing, I'm on episode select. I will be pressing select in 3, 2, 1. And so it takes a while to kick in. So if you've just pressed play, you're already ahead of me. I'm not gonna worry about that. So I've asked subscribers to my Patreon page as well. Oh, is that a plug for that? No, it's a subtle mention that is a plug if you choose it so to be. Have come to me with their thoughts, theories and observations, which I will be perhaps feeding into this as we go along. One of them is very appropriate to this episode. One of them is utter madness, and one of them is very sweet, and I'm very, very grateful to them all. So this is a refilmed episode reprise. Sometimes it's what they do is they just take a film recording of last week's and snip it on the beginning, but that's a different skull layout. I think I prefer the one from last week with the skull on its side. That one looks a bit more posed, but it starts with a close-up of the Doctor being desperately sorry. It's interesting where we sort of hang on things like that. That's quite an important moment where it shows that he's not just the entirely irascible and abrasive character that we so often talk about William Hartnell as being. That's partially because there was a sort of almost a group hallucination, I think, from people working at the in the show. Those very first interviews with people that had was oh yes, William Hartnell was very old and he was very grumpy and his doctor was very grumpy. Well, one William Hartnell was 55, which is not that old. And he may have been quite grumpy, but there's also lots of stories about him being very, very lovely. And I think he had difficulties. But also his doctor is not entirely 100% irascible. I love this. This is the 1960s, lost 1960s drama school art of holding something very still while the episode title and writer appear over it. In this case, it's Eileen Way holding a stone knife and blade, and she's looking at the camera there as well. Again, Waris Hussein shooting through some hole in the cave here, which goes to show what an inventive director he is and how ambitious he is with his camera work. I think that slightly displaces our characters and has us eavesdropping on their plight somewhat. They don't off-road. Look at the wonderful Jacqueline Hill on her front here. They're very down and dirty. They do, as we see in this story, get grubbier than I think in any other time in the classic series, the TARDIS crew. I like Ian Chesterton, William Russell there telling the Doctor, don't sit there and criticise us. He's gutsy and he's got fire, Ian, and we're working out the dynamic here, and the Doctor says it blatantly. We have to free Ian because Ian is the sort of action hero, for want of a better word. He's the one that's more likely to be able to get them out of there. But later on in this story, Ian, when they say, who is your leader? He says, oh, the Doctor is. The women get a slightly rougher deal. We there's no point in apologising for history, really. And I think within the confines and the limitation of what drama did, and sometimes when you watch other old dramas, women get a pretty rough deal across the board. So within the context of the time, we're certainly lucky with the two actresses that we have, and in spite of some of the very limiting things that they're given to do, I also think they get brilliant stuff to do. But I think in this story particularly, they do get a quite a rough deal in these episodes. Especially, I think Jacqueline Hill, who proves herself to be an absolutely superb actress and is given much better quality material later on. Fear makes companions of all of us. That's a wonderful line and one that has stuck. Hartnell looks slightly wretched there, doesn't he? Slightly, he's not dominating. He's not full of authority. He's not the stuff of legend. He's a slightly lost. A slightly lost old man there, and he's vulnerable. I like that. The other thing, Jim and I hit upon the same thing about the cave characters is that I think both Jeremy Young and Derek Newark show the sort of thought processes that the characters are doing. They are slow-witted by modern standards, and by modern I mean also 1963, and they show their characters' sort of minds sort of ticking over concepts that are difficult. This is a slide sheet, isn't it? The idea that we're stuck in a cave, we can't get out. What are those twigs in the corner? Oh, nothing. Well, except they're just covering a massive hole in the side of the cave through which you could escape. But look at the shooting also favours the faces. This isn't a brilliant example of it because he gets closer, particularly on Newark in a lot of places. Although here we are, a closeness of Alethea Charlton. He trusts his actors so much that he can get right up close to them. And look at the way that Alethea Charlton's eye sort of narrowed slightly in thought and then brightened. Every little sort of bit of facial expression is trusted here, and and shows a lot that the dialogue isn't doing. Look at Newark, sort of, as I say, his mind is sort of ticking over, and the black makeup on the teeth, by the way, is also very effective to try and show that these aren't 20th century humans, despite the fact that they are played by people our size, our posture, our teeth. But I think they've gone for it very well, and the faces are great. That it's really good casting. But I can't choose the actors this week because I chose them last week. So listen up. Mark Owen. Not that. Hang on. The first example of a polystyrene rock acting in the show's history. They do a decent job of it. You can slightly hear the polystyrene rock. It's very difficult to disguise. But viewers at the time, I mean, you were used to that sort of thing. You were used to rocks that were largely sold to you by the valiant efforts of the performers. I actually think the set design here is in this series is very good. Barry Newbury, who did most of the historicals, and Ray Cusick are real heroes of 1960s Doctor Who. And that's a compromise, that hole in the wall. It was supposed to be high up, I think, and they were supposed to climb through, but there's only so much you can do in a studio. But there's little recesses in these, and the use of the skulls, and plenty of bits to shoot through. I think, seeing as it's a cave, I think the designer gives the director lots of options that he uses to their full advantage. Derek Newark does a bit of sort of twitchy eye stuff as well. Again, that suggests the whirring motors in it, the whirring synapses of this, as I say, less sophisticated human. It's great stuff. But Mark Owen, not that one. Although Howard Donald has sent me some amazing observations on the Sensorites. Mark Owen from my Patreon page says, I have a theory here that bounces merrily on the diving board of nerdiness and plunges into the deep end of retconning fanboy nonsense. I mean, I think it's worth it for that sentence alone. This jungle set's good too, by the way. Here goes. Episodes 2, 3, and 4 of An Unearthly Child are set on Gallifrey, the fast return switch being activated but not quite working correctly. By giving the tribe the secret of fire, the Doctor and chums take the very first step towards the technology of the Time Lords. The Doctor has written his own future from the start. I apologise for the advanced nerdiness of this, and yes, I do have a life. I'm just grateful for the chance to get this off my chest without having to compile an A5 photocopied fanzine. Well, I mean, it's a theory, and if your canon is what you want your canon to be, I'm enchanted by that idea. I actually like less the Doctor being a part of Time Lord lore and a pioneer and a history maker than a sort of slightly underachieving travelling loon who nonetheless does what is right and uses intelligence, invention, and moral conviction to do amazing things, despite not being the best at anything. I prefer the Doctor to be an accidental tourist rather than the stuff of legends, but that's because I think of myself as accidental rather than legendary. Andrew, I've said before and will say again, I think we create the Doctor in our own image sometimes. But I nonetheless, I like the chutzpah of that theory. I'd watch these four doing anything. Again, poor old Jacqueline Hill there has had to be scared of something. Was it off camera? I know we see the creature slightly later, and the men here have to be very concerned for the women, which dates it. But these two men are excellent. I like their fiery, splenetic dynamic that they've got there. Ian takes no nonsense, but the Doctor, the Doctor puts up a front as well. But it makes for a testy dynamic, which I really like. The camera goes nice and high there. The camera works right, because that's the other thing Morris Hussein's camera does, is it creeps around in quite an unsettling way. And these sets are tiny, but they do a good job with them. And there's this, the sound effect there, because we're gonna have the animal, which for the Too Much Information, the sister podcast to this, where I dissect this piece by piece. I'd started typing up when Zara is attacked by a bear. You don't actually see what it is, and I don't think it specifies what the animal is. And I know in early drafts it was a panther, but I think it's yes. And I know that Barbara was originally supposed to get blood on her hands here, which would make her hysterics slightly more justified, but they don't go for it as disgustingly as it was in the script. Although again, that shooting through the head of the carcass does the job. It suggests it rather. But again, poor old Jacqueline Hill. I feel for. I don't think she does anything wrong, but Barbara has to do a lot of being alarmed for quite a long time. But that's good, isn't it? When you see that the travellers go, and then the two cave people come into focus following them. And I love this shot of the four regulars, and again the light bouncing off their faces is a really good image. And again, the whole plot of this episode is basically that it's the forest of fear. It's crossing from the cave to it's the bit in between the cave of skulls and the TARDIS. Now there's this we're about to come across a slightly controversial bit, which is what Nathan Moore has emailed me about. Alethea Charlton's keening here is superb, and they're having to sell this attack without us seeing it, because that's television at the time. We can't show an unspecified animal attack for a number of reasons. So Alethea Charlton's off-screen, slightly odd but deliberately odd keening wail, and the alarm shown by the travellers is what tells us what's gone on. And there's a recording break to apply a bit of bloody makeup to Derek Newick's chest, and I love her instinctive protection of her man here, and that sort of that mistrust and that, as I say, that sort of instinctive, almost animalistic protective urge. Because I used to think of Alethea Charlton as quite a sort of mumsy sort of actress, but she's really not. It's really clever in this, and again, not award-winning type of stuff, not particularly rewarding type of stuff, but she absolutely commits, and she makes some really clever choices in a role that I think a lot of people could have just done the basics with. Nathan Moore says, the Tribe of Gum, what are your thoughts on the Doctor threatening the life of a caveman during the first story? Is it a too obvious indication of his morally ambiguous beginnings? Well, I don't know if it could be. Can it be too obvious? I mean, it is quite. Oh, it's coming up. It hasn't happened yet, but it is quite obviously staged. There's nothing in the way that William Hartnell grabs the knife that suggests he's attempting subterfuge. So he was always going to get caught. Yeah, you tell him, Barbara. and and and, and the Doctor sort of has a point. He's, funny enough, the episodes I've, can I say this because of the running order? Yeah, the episodes I've just watched actually is the parting of the ways, where the Doctor refuses to be a pragmatist and goes, "I'm not going to blow up the whole of the Dalek fleet," which is a really interesting bookend to this, where he goes, this guy's an unsophisticated savage. I mean, he's essentially saying that, yes, these aren't very developed people, so therefore, their lives aren't worth quite so much. Now, if you're escaping, potentially, escaping with your lives, that is not an unreasonable standpoint. It's not necessarily the standpoint you want from the hero of a child-friendly tea time series, which makes it interesting. But of course, don't say interesting, Toby. Which just play with our sensibilities. And of course, as Doctor Who fans, I think we largely go, it's a bit of an aberration, that moment, because the Doctor, as well as giving up smoking, in this first story, also gives up murder. And we choose to overlook it, but it does happen. And of course, there's a contrast with what happens here, because Zar holds a knife and there's nobody there. Cal holds a knife and there's nobody there to stop him. Whereas what we're about to see now is the Doctor also pick up a knife, but it is the influence of 20th century mankind that stops him behaving like, interestingly, I need an interesting box, like the caveman that he has just condemned. He's just said, look, these people are unsophisticated savages, so we should leave him. And now he's about to pick up the knife and go, and in fact kill him. And we've just seen one of the unsophisticated savages do just that, kill somebody with the same sort of weapon. So the story kind of points the finger at the Doctor in more ways than one. And when mentioning that, I love that bit that Alethea Charlton does when she's over Zara and not quite understanding the motives of the 20th century people who yes, they're not speaking a foreign language linguistically, but they are, morally and in terms of motivation. And Hartnell holds himself brilliantly here, and his facial expression is absolutely fantastic. Those darting eyes, that sort of aloof pragmatism that he does. But he's not very subtle here. But it's there to it's there to illustrate that the Doctor is a shifty anti-hero, which is definitely how producer Verity Lambert always described him, as being anti-establishment and anti-hero. But they never, as I say, I mean, he's still duplicitous later on. He's duplicitous in the very next story, isn't he? His dishonesty causes the whole adventure. So it's always worth, I think, remembering, and the series does carry on reminding us. You think of Tom Baker's detachment about death, and that's just one example of and Baker's John Pertwee's arrogance, his pride. The Doctor is not always nice and likable and our friend, and yet we love the Doctor. Well, I do. Howard Lang here from the Aeneid Line, man of the sea. If you want to find out more about him, listen to my Too Much Information podcast, where I'll tell you even what football team he supported. That's the stuff. God, Toby, you're niche. I'm like, I was just going to compare myself. I was going to say, I'm like a prostitute that dresses in a ghoul and recites the lyrics of Kajagoogoo. You know, somebody wants me, but it's very bespoke and probably slightly perverse. The old mother, the first death in Doctor Who. So Eileen Way paved the way to many more murders. How many on-screen deaths have there been in Doctor Who? I'm sure somebody has done a tally. But naughty Cal, you fibber. But you don't. But also interesting. You interesting. You don't see her die. It's an off-screen death. Funny enough, a bit like Clive in Rose when Doctor Who comes back, who also dies off-screen. And I remember thinking, oh, can you not show death on screen anymore? Doctor Who later got very bloodthirsty. But how interesting that the first character death in 2005 was off screen in the same way that the first character death is here. And of course, one of these cave people didn't make it to episode 3. Margot Maxine, I wonder where she is, who walked off set on recording day of episode 2. And here's a bit of film. Showing, the sanctuary of the TARDIS is blocked off. So they've been very quick, actually, if you think about it. And Jeremy Young having to do with his face at the end of the episode what Eileen Way, and what a face. That's a brilliant shot. And there you're really trusting your actors. But he's having to hold that for a hell of a long time as the vision mixer fades very slowly to black. I bet as soon as that was finished, he went, oh, thank Christ for that. That's the last time that credit's on, by the way. Special effects by the Visual Effects Department of the BBC. That is not on the next episode. I have to think of something to choose for episode 3. So I will pause. Oh no, I don't need to pause. It's going to go to the menu. What is my favourite thing about episode 3? Now, it could be the set design. It could be Waris Hussein's shooting of faces. But is Jim Sangster going to choose that? Is he going to choose that? It's not going to be the death of the old mother, is it? Is it going to be the Doctor threatening to kill Tsar? I mean, that's the moment of the week. That's the bit to write home about. That's the historical anomaly that is probably, if looking back now, that is the most notable aspect of the episode because of all it throws up and because it's an unusual moment and because it speaks to how different people view exactly who and what the Doctor is. And I think it's I think it's nice how the episode has Cal doing the similar thing. That's an interesting symmetry that I'd not necessarily noticed before. Barry Newbury set design, Norman Kay's music, which I haven't talked about, but it would be a cheat to choose it, having not spoken about it here. But I do like his music. I'll maybe save that to talk about next week. And I also next week have a lovely way to open with a viewer and listener who has sent me in a lovely observation about watching this with his 12-year-old son. So I'll open next episode with that. I say that as much of a reminder to myself as to you. But what will Jim Sangster have chosen? It's a tricky one. He might have chosen the set design, which is very, very good. But I think I have to be true to myself, and I think I have to say the camera work specifically is very well directed, full stop, but I think that's a slight cheat. And I love the roving camera, and I love the camera that goes through shoots through the set and stuff. But I particularly like the way Waris Hussein trusts his actors and goes right into the actors' faces. And we have a lot of lingering close-ups there that sort of show the complex psychology that's going on behind the eyes. and that's a great trust in your actors, but it also makes for very striking visuals because of the way that it is lit and because of the way that they are made up. And it's not just the cavemen there. I think, there's close-ups of Hartnell in particular, but all of and William Russell as well. So yeah, the close-ups, the actors' faces, the roving camera, the camera work. What has Jim Sangster chosen? I bet he hasn't chosen the camera work.
Best bit of the next episode, and actually it's all the way through the story, is the music, especially the escape through the forest of fear. And I think it's a real shame that none of the original recordings for Norman Kay's serials survive, because he destroyed them all. Apparently he felt that his TV work was beneath him and wasn't worth keeping. It's a small ensemble of musicians, and it really adds to the creepiness and pace of the story. I absolutely love it.
I do love the music, and I did mention it, didn't I? But it would have been a cheat, just because I happened to not concentrate upon it on this particular commentary. That's the way that it goes. That's the nature of the beast and the format. So in the Forest of Fear, I was flummoxed by my own format. I'll take that. I will talk about the music next time, I think, because I'm not going to do it now because I have moving footage to talk over, and I don't want to have gaps in that whilst I've overstayed my welcome here. So, without further ado, now that we know that the Forest of Fear is actually on Gallifrey, and they were early Shabugans, on that bombshell from Mark Owen. Well, all I can say is, take that. Ta-ta. Well, hello everybody. Welcome to part 4 of Doctor Who. The 4th ever episode and the final episode of the first story, which is either called An Unearthly Child. That's what I call all 4, even though, strictly speaking, I know that really only refers to the first episode. Some people call it 100,000 BC. I don't, because that's relatively new, and like the old mother, I reject new things just on principle, and to others it's the tribe of gum, and that's what Jim Sangster, my guest, refers to it as in the emails that he sent me, so that's what he thinks it's called, but whatever. If I refer to it as any of those 3 things, you know what I mean, so you don't need to go, I think you'll find, because it's a waste of your time and mine. So, I record this deep in the pits of the plague, and I have to confess I'm feeling slightly underwhelmed today. I don't think I've achieved enough, I haven't exercised enough, and I've eaten rubbish. And that sometimes happens at the moment, so I've turned to Doctor Who to cheer me up. So, and actually, so the timing is good, because I was regretting not doing this last night when I did episodes 2 and 3. But I've had a message from Andrew East, who hoped he wasn't too late, and you weren't, Andrew. That I'm gonna read now, so I'm not cheating over the episode. Dear Toby, you may remember that I posted a message on your Patreon feed asking if you would be interested in the thoughts of my 12-year-old son Toby, poor fellow, on the tribe of gum. I hadn't realised you'd given a deadline of that week for comments. Anyway, blah-de-blah. My wife and I are both teachers, as well as my 2 children coping with their own online learning. I'm hoping I'm not too late with Toby's thoughts, as he was quite excited about featuring in the podcast, although I'm aware it's now 3 weeks later. It's fine, Andrew, it's fine. I do hope you can find some way of including his ideas. I'm gonna! Toby is big into history, and so one of his principal takeaways from the story was the presentation of the caveman tribe. Hello, Toby, by the way. And this Toby liked the cavemen tribe too. His favourite thing in the story was the fact that the cavemen have a backstory, as he put it. You feel like they're proper characters because you know about what has happened to them before the story. However, he was also a little disappointed in what he feels are historical inaccuracies. Now, I'm not an expert, and he actually knows more than me, as he seems to absorb historical information like a sponge, so I can't vouch for the accuracy of this, but Toby reckons the tribe are too settled. He reckons that if they all have already had fire, then they should have moved on to farming. He believes that when tribes first had fire, they were nomadic, but this tribe seemed to be settled in one place. As I say, I've no idea if this is true, and I'm sure knowledge has moved on since this was written in 1963, but I thought it interesting and indicative of the show's original educational remit that it prompted these thoughts in him. Yeah, and 2 viewers did actually write about some things they thought inaccurate about the tribe at the time. So that's very interesting. But also, I would say Toby's probably right, because in my experience, I thought one of the things about getting older was you're able to tell kids that they're wrong about stuff because you're older and you know things. And I increasingly find my children actually know more about things than I do because they're still of an age where they can learn new things, whereas my head is sort of slightly fossilized. The one thing I thought you'd be able to do as a grown-up, which is be right all the time, just by dint of you being grown up, is not actually true. So, Toby, I think you're probably right, and I like the application here. We're on to the Daleks now, and one thing he's noticed is the shift in relationship between Ian and the Doctor, who, in the Tribe of Gum, are quite antagonistic towards each other, but in the Daleks, Ian starts to respond more to what the Doctor says. I apologise if it's too late. It's not, and I want to get Toby's thoughts on it. You're welcome, Andrew, and Toby too. Very interested in your thoughts. I think those are great observations, and yes, the cave people do have a backstory, and your historical thoughts there, Toby, are very educational. You're never too young to learn, which is something the old mother should have been responsive to. Instead, she got a stone in the face. So, well, thanks to Andrew and to Toby for that. Always good to hear from people, especially the young. Right, we're going to crack on with episode 4. I hope you have it all ready and lined up. Let's see what we make of the Fire Maker. Press play now. So here we go. Episode 4 of, I suppose it's a 3-parter because the first part has nothing to do with it. Whatever. No, but it's one production block, isn't it? But then again, so is Mission to the Unknown and Galaxy 4. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Who cares? We all know what we mean. We all know what we're watching. Now, fans of Jeremy Young would have hoped that because he got the big close-up at the end of... there's no forest set here, of course, because they don't need the forest set this week, so Ian's in front of a drape. But we don't get the close-up of Jeremy Young. Instead, we straight to the cave, and Howard Lang gets the first line, and because the guest cast are credited in order of appearance, old Hawg, who is definitely the smallest guest character, gets top billing, which means that Jeremy Young, who is billed as the main guest star in the Radio Times, never gets top billing because of the way that the credits work. I am probably the only person that cares. Now, interestingly, of course, they were taking Tsar to the TARDIS in order to get antibiotics to treat him, but they actually never get that far, but he gets better anyway. So it just goes to show the anti-vaxxers are correct. No, not at all. Can you imagine? Tsar does not want to go to the TARDIS for antibiotics. Tsar thinks it's all a conspiracy to microchip the tribe of Gum. The parallels. Well, we do seem to be being plunged into prehistoric times once again. It's just because Jim that said he thought in his appraisal of this that Cal was sort of totally evil. I feel some sympathy for Cal. He's trying to survive, and he's not malicious. I mean, I think I'd have killed the old mother. She was horrible. and he does play it slightly guilelessly. You know, he's slightly forlorn. But this is great work from the Doctor. Sort of going, your knife's rubbish, and Cal, because he's a bit, he's obviously not the Doctor's intellectual equal. Does his sort of Columbo Miss Marple thing of going, you are gathered in. He's gathered everybody in the tribe's tea room and gone. The killer is in this very room. But he did it very cleverly by going, your knife's not very good. So this is lovely stuff from the Doctor, showing his keen intelligence, and I like the little bit of collusion with Ian there, where he sort of says, right, just follow what I'm doing, and let's do a pile-on. Let's do which again, I'm in this current age of people ganging up on people. Again, I do feel a little bit of sympathy for Cal here. Even though he's only got himself to blame, I don't like mob justice. I do like the way Derek Newick's sort of, he's chewing a wasp to give him a sort of grimacy, almost animalistic quality. And what's even better, of course, is that in a conventional narrative, Tsar would be kind of like, okay, thanks very much. They said he shoves Ian out of the way because our morality, where if somebody helps us out, we sort of acknowledge that and perhaps give them what they want. He goes, okay, well, you've given me a profound line about Cal not being stronger than the whole tribe. Now I'm going to stick you in the Cave of Skulls again. Which, and I think showing that, again, it goes to how well I think the cavemen are done here. As well as the sort of guttural language and the slightly different thought patterns, but like the thing about the animal taking away the axe in its skull and all that sort of stuff. You have that different morality about, well, just because they've helped me out doesn't mean we're all mates now. Do you know what I mean? And it sort of plays into that idea that in these early years, all of these characters are on the run. Essentially, they're trying to get back to 20th century Earth, really, but and the ship is their lifeline. And essentially the adventures are the annoying things that happen in between them trying to get back to the ship, which is their only link with civilization. Which means our travellers are slightly, sort of at sea, which is really perilous, because it means you can never relax within the adventure, because the adventure isn't actually the bigger picture. And even though that it's not played as a story arc or a build up towards a season climax where they somehow get closer to their goal or anything, they don't do it like that. It's even though it is one continuous adventure, because we get a cliffhanger at the end of even every story. It does feel like that's an underlying dramatic sort of underscore to the adventure of the week, is that these are marooned, lost souls, and I do hope that some people watching are giving this Maybe people are different. People's experiences are different, but my experience and my feeling amongst friends and fans is that these cave people episodes are not given much heed. The way that Alethea Charlton there does that, I do not understand, is superb. And they're sort of, they're learning about society. This is very good. But this is not a mawkish thing where, people from our time come and wag their fingers at people from the past and they learn how to be better. But it shows that, we are creatures who evolve, and with a little bit of prompting from the time travelers, Tsar is working out the more effective way to be leader. But I just spilt my drink. He's a leader, and I don't want to stop the podcast. Oh, he's a leader who I might have to hang on. There was a recording break while the scene had to be reset to clear up the drink that the narrator dropped. Anyway, oh dear. Anyway, sorry, apologies for that technical glitch. Now, how easy is it to make fire? Because it was always a thing at school. Oh yeah, you make fire by rubbing two sticks together. But I remember us all having a go, and we never pulled it off. But at least they show it's hard. And Ian really does put a load of labour into it. I watched Castaway with Tom Hanks the other day, which, funnily enough, has a similar quest for fire. And again, it shows how much effort he really has to go into to do that. But obviously, it is possible because that's how we got fire. But I've never pulled it off myself. Unfortunately, I live in a time when one doesn't have to, but isn't it extraordinary how something that we take so for granted? And look, yes, the Doctor is the leader of the tribe. That's very, very interesting because he. I remember there's a wonderful blog that became a book called Adventures with the Wife in Space by Neil Perryman and his wife Sue, where Sue sort of says of this era it should be called Ian because he's very much the hero. Look at Hartnell's keen intelligence and sort of following the action there. He is slightly patronising to the caver. Yes, dear, we're doing this for you, but they are slower on the uptake. The cave people. And yes, the firemaker is the least important because we can all make fire. But of course, if this pandemic had taken over, how many of us had civilization collapsed? How many of us that think of ourselves as being very clever and able to do important things in the 21st century? I love that scene in the original Survivors when Peter Copley and Carolyn Seymour have a chat and he goes, how would you make a candle? All of these things that we think of are really simple. Other people do for us. I couldn't make a fire. I couldn't make a candle. It's a lesson in sort of pragmatic politics as well. And hogs are right. Hawk changes like the wind. This common body like to a vagabond flag upon the stream. And also, and he uses his daughter as a sort of bargaining chip as well. The roommate fire, you can have my daughter. Charming. Again, different morality. And is this? So I don't know who this extra is, but is the first person to die on screen, pretty much in Doctor Who. There's fire in the studio. Interestingly, because stop saying interesting. there's no visual effects person credited for this episode. They've stopped with the credit special effects by the visual effects department of the BBC, even though Jim Ward supervised the visual effects, and I think it's something like the demarcation of which department at the BBC was allowed to use fire, and one had a fire certificate, and I think the design department didn't, so visual effects had to, because they were allowed to use fire. I mean, it sounds nonsense, doesn't it? Oh yeah, well, and fire. I mean, fire in the studio is that wasn't a straightforward thing, nor of course was a fight, which is why we're gonna close in on the Travellers, and then we're going to go to a film studio for beautifully lit fight scene that can be done with stunt doubles, Billy Cornelius and Derek Ware, who was one of the first Doctor Who people I met, because he was the swordmaster of a Ludlow Festival play that my brother was in, which have I talked of before on this. And I love this fight because they bite each other. It's pretty grim. And of course they revealed that they, because they get a bit down and dirty, they have to be fairly blatant that they have caveman pants, which they probably wouldn't have done at the time. There's all sorts of things they wouldn't have done at the time. I think the set looks great, the light looks great, the cutaways to close-ups of the Travellers are good, but this is a really grim, and I like the way the noises that they make that are quite, because fighting is horrible. And it doesn't always sound nice, and of course, added to the fact that these are sort of savage early man, I think they really do it well, and yeah, Derek Ware holds a place in my heart because he was the first sort of proper Doctor Who person I was in the vicinity of. Although I didn't meet him that time, but he then came back to Ludlow, and I was working, so he came to ask for tea, and I then met him a few times later. I actually suggested him for the DVD commentary for The Mind of Evil, which I think one of the first time, certainly the first time we've done a commentary. I love that scream that Jeremy Young does. Famously, of course, there was supposed to be the sound of stories change, whether it was a cabbage with a hammer, with a mallet, or various different things. The sound of a crushing skull, which was removed. Also, I think there's a suggestion that you're supposed to see a close-up of the damage that had been done. It works just as well without. I love the way Derek Newick drags the dead body off, really, and his leg goes up. It's really sort of unnatural and grim, and shows the real sort of ugliness of death. When death often and fighting often on television is quite slick and well choreographed. I think that's a fantastic moment, and I'm especially pleased that because Derek Ware was my first sort of meet with someone from Doctor Who, that of course that he was involved with the very first story. I mean, extraordinary, and very pleasing, and he was a lovely man, Derek, who did founded Havoc, the stunt agency, but worked in films as well. Worked on The Italian Job, and was a lovely guy. Derek Ware, that is. And the fire looks great on screen as well. It's a fantastic visual fire. But yeah, that fight is pretty uncompromising and very, very well done. It's a showpiece moment. I think the fight was overseen by Douglas Camfield. I've got a bugbear here where on IMDb, and therefore as a result in various quizzes, Douglas Camfield is credited as director alongside Waris Hussain. For production assistant oversees a scene or an aspect of production. They're doing that as part of their role as production assistant. It doesn't suddenly mean they're co-director. And I think that's just somebody showing off on IMDb going, I read a thing where it said Douglas Camfield directed a scene, therefore he is director of this, like Waris Hussain. Well, okay, Derek Newick co-wrote it because he added some of his lines. David Whittaker co-wrote it. I mean, you could add all sorts of lists of people, because they contribute over the course of a production. This is directed by Waris Hussain. It is written by Anthony Coburn. Despite the fact that bits were done by other people. It's just, I'm not necessarily sure democracy is a good thing when it comes to facts being written up on websites like Wikipedia and IMDb, because everyone has their own sort of funny little hills to die on, and it sort of muddies the straightforwardness in order that people can do their own I think you'll finds, which I never think are particularly helpful, and I think say more about the person doing it than the truth behind the story. But that's my own hill that I die on. So I'm aware that I could be hoisted by my own petard on that one. They do get lovely and grubby here, and oh yes, practical lamb chops, I think. That's very good. It reminds me of the story of the actor. Have I told this? Who's in the play, and he goes, you working, love? Yes. What are you doing? Is it a good play? No, it's a terrible play. Good company? No, awful company. Oh. Good money? No, the money is terrible. Why are you doing it then? There's a practical sandwich in Act 2. And it's either here or, and I think it might be more likely the episode 2, because he's eating something in episode 2 as well, that Derek Newitt got some of the fat from the food and put it in his wig. Oh no, you can see his wig's a bit manky there. Put because he thought the wig looked a bit pristine, which I think is a lovely idea, but I mean, it wouldn't have done much for the smell in the studio. It must have been pretty grim. No wonder everybody smoked, because must have got a bit stinky. But that fire looks great. That's Carol Ann Ford's own costume, isn't it? Because she had a different costume in the pilot, and that's part of a suit. So she had matching trousers, and they were, I think, black and orange. Is it Mary Quant? I think. So she brought. I think the matching trousers as well would have been pretty out there. But yeah, I think she brought that in herself. I love that image of the skull with the flame sticking out. That is, I mean, it's so simple, such a simple idea, and yet it looks brilliant in the black and white. And you actually, again, sometimes I think things that portray savages, for want of a better phrase, can be a bit sort of patronising, and not particularly convincing. But I totally buy that these cave people would be pretty alarmed by this sight, which is pretty awful. And that's a fantastic shot, and yeah, they're doing a good job there. Although, yes, why? And they do eventually see through it, because yeah, it's not that convincing a trick. Going, yes, those skulls on sticks, they are us. They could have at least put Susan's top on one of the sticks, or with William Russell's shirt or something. And we're on film here, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it must be. But it's great because, yes, so instead of the story, which would now probably end with, the cavemen all sitting around the fire going, "You've given us fire, Doctor, you are the stuff of legend." "I know, aren't I? It's rich." And everybody patting themselves on the back, and the doctor, and it go, "Doctor, it's almost like you've helped the start of mankind." "I know, because I'm involved in everything." Instead, it's, "You're pesky travellers, and you're going to escape by the skin of your teeth," which I think is much more my image of Doctor Who as a sort of series of random accidents. And I love it when the Doctor influences big things, but again, more because of more by accident rather than design, and not because the Doctor is nearly a god. And here's, of course, the famous they're running on the spot and having the branches rubbed past their face, because to make better use of the space. Now, these cavemen here are among them are 8 unidentified extras. We don't have the paperwork saying who they are, but certain actors over the years have said they were among them. Roger Hammond, Francis Bacon in The Chase and Dr. Runciman in Mordred Undead. Norman Jones, Major Baker in Doctor and the Silurians, Chris Ong in The Abominable Snowman, Hieronymus in The Mask of Mandragora, both claimed on separate occasions to have been a caveman in the first William Hartnell one, and there's no reason why they wouldn't be, very early in their careers. So who knows who else is hidden among them? It's very difficult to make them out, sadly. You don't really get, and that shot of the TARDIS going, the spears flying through it, was done when they did the opening shots, the first bits of model work for the production on different days to when they did the stuff with the cave people. And there we go. So the last thing we see of the nice caveman Tsar is the fact that they're chasing the Doctor and chucking spears at them, because look how dishevelled they are. I think that's great. They're flying from peril to peril, and they're out of the frying pan or out of the fire maker into the frying pan, even in the frying pan of Skaro. And of course I remember watching this as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, being quite surprised that it ended on a cliffhanger. That was the first inkling I had that this was a sort of an adventure in time and space and time, and it's a lovely model we get of a glimpse of the petrified forest. The fire has killed us all on the planet Skaro, and I just love the visuals of this crew. Hartnell looks great. That wig is absolutely terrific. He had a birthmark, that was made up, covered by makeup every week. Yeah, so I remember 5 Faces of Doctor Who going, oh gosh, it finished. And now, of course, and there's no explanation. It's just no. Next week it's Patrick Troughton in the Crotons. But it's an extra onus on the writer to go, when you finish the story, you have to lead into the next one. And Doctor Who does it with and they don't always do it, to be fair, and they do it with varying degrees of success, I would say. But there we go. That is I do like a cliffhanger at the end of I was just thinking about, there's one at the end of 4 to Doomsday, isn't there? And there's one at the end of Frontiers. So it's not just confined to the Hartnell era. Derek Ware got a credit there as well. And here we are. That is the end of the first ever Doctor Who story. I'm very pleased Jim chose that. I thought that was a good and an interesting choice. And I have to choose my favourite thing about episode 4 and a bonus thing. Well, my favourite thing for episode 4 has got to be the fight. I think it's really, really good. The fact that it's on film means it looks a bit extra. It's dirty. It's screechy. It's ugly. And deliberately all of those things, which I think is very bold at a time when often, fights had to look look quite choreographed. I think that was admirably underhand in places, biting and screeching, and Jeremy Young's final screech, that sort of agonized animalistic caterwaul is terrific. So yeah, that's my easy choice for part 4. And as for the overall thing, that's hard. I think that idea that ties in with the grubbiness, that ties in with the testy relationship that they all have, that ties in with that last cliffhanger. I think I'm going to blow it with Jim, because I think I'm being slightly too tenuously linked and abstract. But this idea that this is an adventure, this whole situation is an adventure for all of these 4 people, and that they're on the run. Even within the story, They're, and that the TARDIS is sanctuary and everything else is dangerous, and that this is a sort of grubby seat of the pants, out of the frying pan into the fire, continuous weekly rocket from jeopardy to jeopardy to jeopardy, and that even when a single story is over, the story isn't over, because the story is these people are cut off, like Susan and the Doctor say they are in the first episode. Ian and Barbara are now cut off from what we know and trying to get back to us. I wonder if Jim will choose Warris Hussain, whose direction is superb, but I can't really choose that, because I think I alluded to it when I chose my thing for episode 2, and I could have chosen the music, but Jim has already chosen that, so I think it had to be that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jim chooses the fight. His bonus thing, I think, is gonna do for me. But if he does choose the fight, that means I'm equal with him. Let's see. Wow.
The best thing about the Firemaker is that fight at the end between Cal and Tsar. It's often difficult to be sure who's who, and it's proper violent, especially for the loser. Splat. And finally, my bestest thing of the whole story. Well, it has to be William Hartnell, doesn't it? I'm sure you've picked this. By episode 3, he's telling Barbara that fear makes companions of us all, and it's the first time he's shown any kind of compassion. But in episode 4, he drops the space steptoe act and becomes the smartest man in the room, in the way he tricks Cal into exposing himself as the murderer of Old Mother. Finally, he's the hero we need him to be. He's not Dr. Foreman anymore, he's Doctor Who. So that's that. Hope you enjoyed it.
Do you know sometimes when you read an article or you look at a television programme and you go, why didn't they think of that? Or why did they do that? That seems so obvious to do that instead. As soon as he said, just as he said, I thought, it's William Hartnell. Of course it's going to be William Hartnell. It's the first story. He's the first Doctor. I highlighted loads of brilliant things he does, from the way that he looks to the way that he outsmarts Cal. And that journey that he goes on, and the fact that he is they point out him as the leader. It's obvious that it's William Hartnell, and that William Hartnell is such a key to the success of that story. And I chose stupid threads that I all tied together. He was hiding in plain sight, and it's an object lesson in overthinking and sometimes not seeing the wood for the trees. But mostly, because sometimes when you have an article published and you've read it a million times, and then there's a line that you put just as a sort of placeholder, so you hadn't paid it much attention, and then when it's in black and white, you go, "Oh no, I didn't!" And people go, "Well, that's an obvious mistake. It's only obvious if you're looking for it, and it's only obvious the minute." No, in fact, the second before he said it, it was obvious to me. Whilst I was talking to you and choosing, it wasn't obvious to me. Oh, I'm furious with myself, because I could have won this one. And I missed an open goal there. So I get a tie. I get a score draw 2-2, which I think is about the best I've done. Was I similar with Terror of the Autons with Richard Marson? But I'm kicking myself there. I could have. Even Jim thought I was going to get that. The quest continues. So I suppose it's appropriate I'll leave it on a cliffhanger. Will I ever get more than my guest? Let's hear what Jim has to say about himself, because he's a very creative and interesting man, and I'd very much like you, if you don't know him, to be introduced to him and what he does.
I've just started a blog called escapetodanger.net, where I'm reading all of the Target Doctor Who books in publication order. And I've just got proper grumpy about the Ice Warriors, so I'm probably going to be excommunicated from fandom anytime soon. Hope you're well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Oh, I'm fascinated to see why he's grumpy about the Ice Warriors. In fact, it's become quite fashionable to knock the Ice Warriors full stop, even the TV version. And I remember when it was missing and everyone was desperate to see it. And I still like the Ice Warriors, but actually nobody's chosen it for this yet. So that's something to look forward to. Fire and ice. We'll get round to it eventually. Oh, I'm annoyed I blew that. Sometimes stop, think, and you'll see the truth. And I didn't do that. Anyway, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't matter. It's the journey that buffets us from one episode to the next. So thanks for joining me for this. I've talked for half an hour rather than sat glumly on the sofa thinking about all the things I haven't achieved today and the pestilence that surrounds us. And so that is something. Okay, I'm going to go and light a fire because I want to feel well capable in that. Thank you for joining me. Thanks to Jim Sangster, and I'll see you next time.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Do you know, actually, just as I've been saving that, I've been thinking, I do this all the time. I find myself going, oh, I need to fixate on that thing that annoys me about a certain thing that happens in the writing up and the truth of Doctor Who, because it has to be right. And in the end, I end up doing the very thing that the people that annoy me do. And I did it in a quiz the other day where there was a bit where, and it was about this actually. It was about Douglas Camfield. How many Hartnell stories did he direct? And I just was going, leave it, Toby. It doesn't matter. And I went, well, oh yeah, but hang on, because this says this and this is it. And I interfered, and it made me feel like an annoying smart. It made me feel like I probably came across as an annoying smartass. Whereas if I just shut up and left it, it all would have been fine because other people would have sorted it out, and I'd have come away from that quiz and not then spent the evening regretting my own I think you're finding, which I hate when other people do. And you know, who knows, the person that put Douglas Camfield on IMDb, I've characterized them as going, oh, I found out a thing, aren't I clever? They could have been instead. Why don't I go, oh, it's somebody who's gone, oh, yeah, I read about Douglas Camfield directing that scene, so that's a really interesting nugget. So I'll go on IMDb and I'll put that. It could have been really enthusiastic. It could have been they're trying to commit to the great, you know, the sum of knowledge. It could have been something they did with joy and in a scholastic or an historical approach. I disagree with their findings, maybe, but yeah. So that's just a reminder to myself. I have to hold my hands up and go. And even as I was saying it in the episode, actually, I was going, why am I doing that? And I didn't want to then come to have to edit this and listen to myself doing something that annoys me and then put it out there and then spend the rest of the day worrying that I'd put it out there with me doing something that had annoyed me. So I've said before you've got to the closing titles that bit, if that annoyed you, yeah, it annoyed me too. And it annoyed me as I was saying it. And yet I still said it. I don't know what that proves, but I think I feel better for getting it off my chest. I mean, and none of it really matters. I mean, you know, they were all getting carried away about fire 100,000 years ago. They're all dead now, aren't they? So this will all be dust in the wind. But nonetheless, it seems things do seem terribly important at the time, don't they? Anyway, I hope all I've done with your time is to make it pass slightly quicker, even if it's just helped you go, well, at least I'm not hit. At least I'm not that guy. You're not. But I'd be very pleased if you joined that guy next time he has verbal diarrhea and self-abasement in equal measure, which is what this podcast should be called. And yes, look forward to the next episode of Verbal Diarrhea and Self-Abasement with me, Toby Hadoke. Thank you very much, and good night. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, Doctor Who Chat and Self-Flagellation, presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest was Jim Sangster, who is on Twitter at monster_maker, at monstermaker. Please do follow him. I'm very indebted to him and to my patrons, who include Mark Aldridge, Kit Allen, Sebastian April, Tilt Ariza, Simon Ash, Richard Alt, Thomas Banks, Martin Bellum, James Blackett, Robin Bland, Kyle Bors, David Brody, Nigel Brumley, Hugh Buchtman, Anthony Carroll,
Anthony Carroll, Phil Chapman, Susan Christian, Steve Churchill, Charles Coffin, Paul Colnaghy, Paul Cornell, Leslie Coots, Peter Crocker, Dave Curran, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Matt Dale, Rob Dawson, Chris Davis, Robert Davis, Tim Dickinson, Paul Dykes, Andrew East, Andrew Egan, Mark Findlay Smith, David Gillespie, and Charles Gears. The music for this podcast is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. What a lovely list of names, and you can join that list at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where you will be able to access early releases, exclusive releases, and bonus material, and all sorts of access and interactive stuff. You can tell me what it is you want, and I will probably do it, because I'm very acquiescent, from as little as £3 per month, and you get 10% off that if you sign up for a year in one go. Now, I know that times are tough, and a monthly commitment is quite a big one, so how about going to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke anytime you're feeling flush and you think I seem in need of sustenance, and you can bung me whatever you like there. But I know that times are very, very, very tough, so look, I don't expect anything. I'm just grateful that you're listening. But what costs you nothing in these tough times is to zip along to iTunes and Apple and all those places where you get your podcasts from, and to give Toby Hadoke's Time Travels 5 stars. 5 stars really does help tweak those algorithms and make me look awfully saucy to passing trade, and it costs you nothing to do. 5 stars and perhaps a couple of lines of review that will just direct people here and mean that I can increase my trade, which makes me sound, well, you know what it makes me sound like, and I've just been sounding like it for about the past minute. But there we go. You can also avail yourself of my live comedy shows at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club. That's been running for 24 years. All sorts of brilliant comics have played there and continue to do so. That's in Manchester, though, at 8 p.m. every Tuesday. If geography scuppers you, you can get a taster of it at twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. There's an archive of our online shows there, but we also do a live broadcast on the first Sunday of every month at 8 p.m, and it's me introducing some of the best comedians from around the world. It's a bit ruder than this podcast, though. Be warned. I do like Jim Sangster, you know. We've only hung around probably a dozen or so times, but I met him on the old Doctor Who road, and he, talking of the road, he designs all the sort of placeholder images for radio plays when they're sort of put online. So all of the lovely artwork that has accompanied any of my Radio 4 plays or shows has been done by Jim. Not because the media is all some big conspiracy, it's because that's his job, and I happen to have put some stuff into an area where his job required some input. But isn't that lovely? And he's a thoroughly nice chap, and if you follow him online, you will see all the sort of action figures, as it were, that he makes himself. He's an absolutely brilliant designer, and he creates his own sort of minifigures and stuff that, you know, that aren't available. The wonderful creativity of Doctor Who fans. Some people like Jim use their enormous skill to be really, really creative, whereas I just use the skill I have to say the names of character actors and what else they've done at moments that are of interest to very few people. But, you know, we are all created in different ways. I am what I am.